The network capacities are the pieces that you need in place, basically, to both be a network and to be an effective network. And I'll come back to that in just a second. The network functions are the activities, the actual things that the network does, right, to produce the outputs and the outcomes. So those are the activities, those functions. Organizational functions, that's the back end operational stuff, the HR, the IT. We're not going to talk about any of that. So just pretend it wasn't there. So those are the three core components of this diagnostic framework, which is how we can think about networks, right? So again, this first part of network capacities, we define these 7. We're not going to talk about all of this, but the real point here in thinking about collective learning within the scope of a network is thinking about a network has to have a shared purpose and a membership. In our view, these are the things that make a network and make a network effective. If you don't have a shared purpose and a membership, you don't have a network, basically. And you can relate that, of course, to the collective learning idea that you're coming together, you have people coming together with common interests, and that's your membership. And the shared purpose is those goals that you collectively define to work towards together, right? And the learning is how you achieve those goals. So thinking about, once you got your network, you got your members, you've got them coming together for that shared purpose, for those goals that they want to achieve together, that they can't achieve on their own, right? That's why they've come to the network. We go into the network because the network has to fulfill goals that we can't do by ourselves, that we can't achieve by ourselves. Then these are some network functions. The whole picture is fairly exhaustive of what networks are fit for purpose to do, but I've bolded, highlighted the functions that are more relevant to collective learning, right? So some of this is fairly obvious. Information sharing and knowledge management. Yes, we want to share information, we want to communicate, we want to manage the knowledge that we have, whether that's capturing it, sharing it, creating products from it, documenting, archiving, all the different, databases, etc. But finding ways to manage that knowledge. The learning and capacity building is about helping the members to learn and build their skills and capacities, either as individuals, or if your network is also has, or instead has organizations as members, they are building their capacity as members, right? Through learning, through a lot of that information sharing and such. But then there's these other kind of bigger picture functions, thought leadership and field building, and problem solving and innovation. And the thought leadership and field building is really about, okay, we're here together in this space, whatever our topic of interest is, whether that's, increasing digital equity in the US or ensuring the right to education globally. It doesn't matter what the topic is, but you're coming together in this network to support that field of practice around which your network is organized. And through some of that collective learning, you actually support the building of that field. You push the ideas forward about what it means to work in that space, what good practice is and can be, building the evidence and then applying it to practice in that space. And again, moving that entire space, that field, whatever you want to call it, that area of practice forward, right? Relatedly, the problem solving and innovation piece is, again, we're not just coming here to learn for ourselves. We have core challenges in this space, again, whatever that might be, with the 2 examples I used of increasing digital equity in the US or ensuring the right to education globally. We, in whatever space we're working, we find, of course, problems that we can't solve by ourselves. And so we come together in a network or collectively in some fashion in order to innovate and problem solve together. And this, of course, requires that information sharing and knowledge management and learning within that group in order to, in fact, solve those problems and innovate towards better solutions. So lots of different functions that are relevant to collective learning. And then finally, when we think about networks, of course, we have to think about how to manage them effectively. And this goes to that question as well, the two questions at the beginning about how do you foster that network? How do you bring in diverse perspectives and voices? How do you ensure inclusion? All of these things happen based on how you manage that network. And the way that you best manage a network is by facilitating and coordinating it, right? So taking certain approaches that are really about, again, fostering connections between people, supporting their collaboration, listening, just sharing of ideas, providing people with meaningful ways to engage in the ways that feel good and accessible to them. So we could go on and on about this among other things, but really that, you know, once you have your network in place and once you've decided what sort of collective learning activities and potential outputs and outcomes you want to achieve, the approach you take then is to making that happen is this facilitation and coordination in order to really practically make that collaboration and that collective learning happen. So I'm going to stop there, which I think is great timing because we have at least one question in the chat already. And here's some information about me and Collective Mind if you want to learn more. But more importantly, I want to hear what you would like to say and what you would like to share. So I'm going to stop sharing and open it up. So questions, thoughts, experiences, reflections, whatever comes up for you. And looks like somebody's going off camera. That is just fine. There's no pressure about being on camera, especially with unstable internet. So yes, we've got a hand, Barbara. Please feel free to jump in.
Yes, my biggest question to start with is whether you're mostly dealing with internal networks within organizations or cross-organizational networks, because I think the challenges and the opportunities are very, very different depending on, you know, which ones you're talking about.
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's maybe take a few questions or ideas or responses to that, for that matter. Other thoughts and reflections? Making a note of that question. Yes, question in the chat about using different platforms and what tools work well. That is always an important question and one that comes up all the time. Maybe one more question, or again, thoughts for you to respond to others. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, we always have a challenge. We're a network that works globally and have got a lot of members who work at global levels and local levels. And it's how to balance the interest and make sure that you're delivering on the self-interest, but also the shared interest. And the shared interest can vary considerably. There's maybe one overarching theme, but quite often it's different parts of that theme that people are interested in. So it's a real challenge facilitating. So it's good to learn from others about how they manage that problem.
Yeah. All right. Good. Okay, so we've got a number of questions and ideas here. So we had questions about internal versus inter-organizational networks, a question about tools to use, big picture question about balancing interests, personal versus shared, and then tips for facilitating information sharing with a widely spread network. I can respond, but I'm also happy to have other people respond. Are there any thoughts or reflections that anybody wants to share in response to any of those points?
Hi, Kerstin. I was raising.
Oh, sorry, did I miss you? Please.
No, that's okay. So I think I will go with the question of facilitation and some apps. I'm thinking more on what Barbara mentioned about internal, because I mean, in the experience I have is doing knowledge management for within my organization for our youth group. So I think a couple of tools that had been useful, and it depends what do you need. One is Padlet, and I think they have used this. I don't recall it in with SID, but it's basically like a board, and you can put like questions and guide, and I can put the link to that. And it's free. At least you can have 5 Padlets. If you want more like fancy features and things like that, you can. It's a bit amount to pay for that one, but I think that helps when you're doing breakout sessions and you have people from different parts of the world. Maybe English is not their first language, so writing things is helpful because sometimes you need more time to process some things, etc. So I think that gives chance to people who want to speak up, to people who want to write things and all that. And then the other one that I have found useful is Mural. And with Mural, I would call it like the big brother or sister of Padlet. So because that one, it's as the name says, it's like a big mural. You can create different activities. I have used it for workshops with our projects in the countries. I have used it with our staff here to exchange learning experiences. And that not only helps you during the event itself, but it's kind of having everything in one place in a really friendly way. And again, I can put the chat and share some examples that I have with that. But that I think those can really handy. But I think the main question is like, what do you need it for, right? Because if it's something more like a brainstorming, I would say Padlet. But if you have a workshop or something more in depth with your members, then Mural. So I think that's a key issue.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Cecilia. Anybody else want to chime in? Thanks, Tiffany. I see your question. We're having a discussion, although at this point it's kind of more questions than responses. So perhaps let me go back to some of these. So I think that was Cecilia, that was very helpful in terms of responding about tools and some of the ways in which to facilitate information sharing and such. And I think your point about being very clear about what you're doing and why you're doing it, so as to choose the right tools to that end, is really important. And sort of to this idea about inclusiveness and such, inclusion and such as well, you know, finding the ways that are accessible to people that they're maybe already using for that matter, that aren't an extra kind of leap to have to learn something new. So back to some of these other questions. So this point, the first one about internal versus inter-organizational networks. So yes, I think there can definitely be differences there. And part of it, of course, is, or one thing that comes to mind is the rules of the game, right? That when you're all in one organization, some basics are already in place about how you work together. That could be either a help or a hindrance, depending on what your organization fosters, what the culture of your organization fosters in terms of collaboration and knowledge sharing and these sorts of things. That is certainly an element of this, the cultural norms and behaviors and practices that come from either being internal to one organization or crossing multiple organizations. And how do you work with those different cultures, organizational cultures, personal cultures, all those different levels of culture, to try to bring people into a space in which they can feel comfortable and safe and included in meaningful ways to actually participate with one another. So that's one thought about that. And, you know, I think in some ways it can relate to this question that Mark was raising about interests and balancing personal versus shared interests. So in any network, you're thinking both about how to serve the members' needs. Every member will show up with his or her own value proposition that they want and need to fulfill, whether that's an individual coming to the network or an organization with its representative, whatever it is, that member has a value proposition. They have to justify to themselves and maybe to others in the organization, the time and resources spent, right? And they want to achieve something for themselves. So there's that. balancing that with that bigger picture shared purpose and the collective value that you want to achieve. And it is a balancing act, and we'd have to speak in specifics about any given network and sort of the situations you have, but it's really both. And I think it's important to remember that, because for a number of reasons, but I think in particular because not only are you trying to create something that's greater than the sum of the parts in a network, and that's the purpose of coming together in a network, but that is also why members show up. They come not just to get what they want to achieve, but because they can do something greater, something more, something bigger, something, you know, that leverages everyone's resources and knowledge and skills in that network space that they can't do on their own. And so I think finding a way to really connect that for them is connecting that idea that you're here for yourself, but you're going to gain something by participating in the collective is perhaps a useful way of approaching that. I'm just watching the time, and I'm watching the chat blow up here on the screen. Other questions? I know I didn't answer everything, but just to give a few points, and trying to look at the chat here quickly, where you're engaging with one another, which is helpful. Any final thoughts or questions or reflections?
Yes, an hour's not long enough.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, and thinking, what can I say in these last 28 seconds? It's going to be of high value to everyone here. So yeah, any tips on engaging those who have a lot of institutional knowledge but might be more shy? So I think maybe just to end on that. So I think, you know, engaging people in a network or in any collaborative space is about finding multiple channels, multiple paths that people can walk down to engage in meaningful ways that are accessible to them. And we're leaving. Thank you so much. I'll see you back in the plenary.
Welcome back. Hoping that everyone had productive conversations in the breakout rooms. Again, thanks to our colleagues for leading those discussions. As we're welcoming folks back, a couple of things. One is to be thinking about what you might share with a colleague as a key takeaway from